Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. I'm Casey Counts. The New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee met in Las Cruces recently to discuss water policy and other issues facing our state. On the last episode of Newsmakers, we heard from State Senator Joe Cervantes, who shared his thoughts on the topic. This week, State Engineer Mike Hamman joins the program. His office is responsible for water management in the state. We'll get his thoughts now on the water issues in general and the agreement reached to settle Texas v. New Mexico, the case that's been before the U.S. Supreme Court since 2013. Mr. Hamman, thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Well, first, before we dive into that, for those who may not be familiar with your office, tell us how it's involved in water management.
Well, the state constitution authorizes the state engineer to manage and permit all water resources within the state of New Mexico. And the Constitution has defined a water right as a beneficial use that needs to be determined by my office, and it defines the limit and the right of the use in the state of New Mexico. It's also a prior appropriation state, so first in time, first in right, and that takes priority in the administration of water in each of our river basins, including groundwater.
We talked a little bit about that last week with Senator Cervantes, who thought it was good policy for New Mexico moving forward. What do you think in terms of your opinion on how our water rights are determined?
Is that in relative to the Texas v. New Mexico settlement, or just in general?
No, what you referenced about the first come, first serve water policy that we've had in our state constitution since the start.
Oh yes, it certainly defines a party's legal right to water, and it's been in practice since the dawn of the territorial government established in 1907 that authorized the territorial engineer at that time to administer water in a manner that allows for development within the state of New Mexico, but also protects existing water uses. So it is the law of the land, and that's what we administer water under.
Well, let's move on to Texas v. New Mexico. Obviously, it's just, as we broadcast this, it has just been, or as we're having this conversation, I should say, it's really just been a few days since we've been able to get a look at what this agreement to settle Texas v. New Mexico looks like. But you may have had a little bit more information going in terms of what the agreement looks like. Tell us what you know about it.
The dispute arose in 2011 between the state of New Mexico and the United States relative to the operation that evolved under what was termed the operating agreement. It changed the way the project was operated historically to what we believe was to the detriment of New Mexico from the standpoint of the amount of surface water available in the state and in the lower Rio Grande out of the Rio Grande project for our New Mexico water users. So subsequent to that, the Texas filed a lawsuit within the U.S. Supreme Court defining their concerns relative to the amount of groundwater pumping that was being authorized within the Las Cruces Mesilla Basin area, and also was very concerned about a point of the Supreme Court case was to define what Texas was entitled to relative to what they were calling at the time the 1938 condition. But the court agreed in the first round of the lawsuit, and after extensive technical testimony, et cetera, that the position of New Mexico that the project operated under what they call the D2 condition, which was the conditions from 1958 to 1979, was the period of time that defined the current means and legal means of the way the project had been operated in order to meet the needs of both of the districts. So under that process, negotiations were entered into through a mediation process, and the three states ultimately came up with the consent decree that was an agreement between the three states, which would set a specific delivery index obligation of New Mexico at the Texas border to assure that Texas got its 43%, and then through management of the groundwater system and the surface water system within the Rio Grande project, through Elephant Butte and Caballo reservoirs, the Elephant Butte Irrigation District water users and other users within the state of New Mexico would be allowed to continue pumping groundwater, but also ultimately move back towards the 57% of surface water that the project authorizes for the New Mexico farmers in the Mesilla Basin.
So who does this agreement impact the most, and what are the most severe effects that we'll see?
Well, we do know that we're going to have to begin to manage the amount of depletions that are ongoing within the pumping of the aquifer. Everybody understood that that was going to be a problem anyways because of the continuing decline of surface water availability from the Rio Grande project associated with the current drought and possible additional impacts due to climate change. So everybody was aware that we have been kind of borrowing a lot of groundwater out of the system that the surface water cannot repay as it has in the past. So something had to be done, and this consent decree really defines the mechanism and how that would move forward. We're going to be working with all the water users in the basin. There's really no specific target on anybody's back, but everybody's going to have to pull together under a process of developing a water task force within the basin and coming up with agreements about how we're going to reduce depletions and plan for future growth.
One of the things we discussed with Senator Cervantes was how much of our water use is in the agricultural realm. Can you say what percentage of our state's water use is for agricultural purposes?
It varies by basin, but basically at least 85% of the water in the Mesilla and Rincon basins in the Las Cruces area is being used by agriculture.
So the impacts are going to be felt far greater in the agricultural community, no doubt. We've heard some talk about possible fallowing of fields by farmers. Do you see that as something that's going to be happening in the near future?
Well, one of the things that have been demonstrated by farmers, and I just like to say that they're the most water efficient group of water users I've come to know of in our state. They do a marvelous job of managing the water that they do have, both surface and groundwater. But there are flexibilities because they are the largest water user in the sector in the basin. They have learned how to adapt and how to manage water more efficiently over time, and I think there's a good opportunity for that to continue that process. And we're also looking at various means voluntary fallowing programs. We've already initiated a pilot project that has been very popular thus far by certain groundwater pumpers to go ahead and fallow some fields to take advantage of that program. And we're just developing the whole process right now, but we have a very open mind, and we're going to be working closely with the water users to fully develop what is best for the basin and is also legal and complies with the compact.
Now, are there certain types of crops that you would be looking to manage better or target for fallowing?
Well, the ones that have the most flexibility are what they call the row crops. Obviously, the pecan orchards, they cannot take shortages because of the nature of their water needs. But there's also proactive water savings going on even in the pecan orchards as we speak. But the farmers that have the most flexibility to manage for water shortages are the ones that grow multiple crops within their entire operation, or those that grow row crops. So those folks will probably be working with us on voluntary fallowing programs.
Earlier you mentioned our history of water law and management in New Mexico. I noticed on your website you have a neat timeline. So for folks that are more interested, they can go look at the history of New Mexico water law and management. I also noticed that there was a section on water specifically for a new crop, relatively new crop in New Mexico, depending on how you look at it, and that's cannabis. What can you say about how growing cannabis in New Mexico will affect our water supply?
Well, the way we view it here in our office is even though there's specific requirements of us to pre-permit cannabis commercial growth, we view it as just another crop that is coming into the system. It's not necessarily, in our view, going to create a higher new demand. It's just going to replace possibly a different cropping demand as time goes forward. But you know, the jury's out on how much cannabis will be grown in New Mexico, and we're already seeing signs that there's adjustments going on in terms of actual agricultural production of that crop right now. So we'll see how that plays out.
Well, let's move on to residential use, which I'm assuming would be the second most common use for water in our state. Do you think that municipalities and as state regional governments should be doing more to encourage water conservation in our state?
Oh, certainly. And the state engineer's office has a water conservation office, and we do require, as part of a permit, to what we call a junior groundwater pumper that is a municipality typically. Some of them have senior surface water rights. But most of them have what we call junior groundwater rights. They have a specific permit requirement to do as much conservation as they possibly can, and we provide lots of material and assistance to help them do that.
Let's talk about industrial use in the southeast corner of the state, especially water as it's used in fracking. How much do you think of an impact is fracking having on New Mexico's water supply?
Well, there's a number of particular issues with oil and gas development. Historically, there has been, and as we get farther into the new methods of how they're recovering oil and gas from the deeper formations, it does require a large amount of water, and historically they were using fresh water from various sources to do that, but there's now quite a bit of emphasis on moving towards using produced water that comes from oil and gas operations that can be reused to offset the need for surface water. So we're working hard to try to encourage that moving forward. There is a produced water consortium that's out of New Mexico State that is looking at all kinds of different options for oil and gas exploration and development.
At this point, do we know what's in the produced water and whether it carries its own risks?
There's always risks of anything you do that has to deal with re-injecting water into an aquifer. You have to have very stringent well construction requirements so that it doesn't contaminate different layers of the aquifer as the well punctures those various layers. And we work closely with the Office of the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Oil Conservation Department to make sure that how we permit the freshwater use that our office is responsible for also helps them comply with re-injection of produced water.
Before you joined the State Engineer's Office, you served as Chief Executive Officer for the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. And this is another example of how many agencies are involved in water management across the state. Obviously a very complex issue. We've got state and interstate and intrastate and international and tribal interests at stake. So tell us what it's like, Mr. Hamman, to manage all of those varying interests on a day-to-day basis.
Well, certainly, just within my agency, we have both the Office of the State Engineer for Water Rights Administration and Dam Safety, and then we have the Interstate Stream Commission, who has a commission appointed by the governor that has an executive director and a whole staff that does all of our interstate compact administration work across our state. We have several of those, and each basin has its own unique characteristics and different water users and hierarchies. Some have tribal entities that have either settled or unsettled water rights that require a certain degree of coordination and administration from our office. You have, irrigation districts and multiple acequias and other parts of the state, and each one has its own unique circumstances that and authorities in some cases by the state of New Mexico. So it is quite complex. We also have within the Rio Grande Basin, the lower Rio Grande in particular, there's an international requirement to deliver water to New Mexico under the Treaty of 1904. So all of those things require lots of coordination with federal, state, local, county, and municipal governments, depending on what issue you're trying to address in what part of the state you're trying to address it.
One of the things we hear from some of our state representatives and senators over time, and it can be about lots of different policy areas, but certainly water is one of them, is that they don't feel that southern New Mexico always gets a fair shake, maybe because we're so far away from Santa Fe. What would you say to folks who think that their interests don't get enough attention in Santa Fe?
Well, we hear that from other parts of the state as well, far northeast and northwest, and but we have offices in every 7 different parts of the state that directly deal with all the various water users in those areas. We have a large office right in Las Cruces, and we work very closely with all the water users and their water right needs and out of that office. So I believe the State Engineer's Office is very proactive in working in all areas of the state, including the lower Rio Grande. And you're going to see a big uptick in our involvement now that we have this consent decree, hopefully moving forward with the blessing of the Supreme Court either this fall or this coming spring. And that will require lots of attention and funding to help the lower Rio Grande deal with this new compact requirement.
Now, I'm assuming that funding, has yet to be allocated by the state legislature, that is. What is necessary for New Mexico state lawmakers to do at this point to handle this issue properly?
Well, actually, as of July 1st, the new fiscal year, we do have funding that was allocated in the last legislative session to my office and the Interstate Stream Commission to begin implementing our lower Rio Grande strategy that I mentioned earlier, that everybody knew we were headed for an issue. and now is the time to begin wrapping up to address the declining aquifer and the long-term needs of the lower Rio Grande.
All right. State Engineer Mike Hamman, thank you so much for helping shed light on this complex issue affecting our state. We appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you reaching out and doing what you can to help it, educate all of our water users in the lower Rio Grande. Appreciate it.
Farmers and ranchers know that no matter what they do right, there are forces that affect their livelihood that are simply out of their control. So any extra help they can get is appreciated. And sometimes that comes in the form of faith. The New Mexico Farm and Ranch Museum recently hosted the Blessing of the Fields procession, a Las Cruces tradition led by prayer and music. Our producer, Evelyn Sandoval, shares more about the Blessing of the Fields.
We gathered here at Farm and Ranch Museum to do the annual procession of San Isidro.
We give thanks for everything that will be born today.
Nombre Padre, del Hijo, del Espíritu Santo, Amen. Please face to the right, to the south.
As the cantors were singing to the north and the south and the east and the west, recognizing that God is creator even before of the north and the south and the east of the west. Grant that when we are sprinkled with this water, or make use of it, we will be refreshed inwardly by the power of the Holy Spirit. It's true that life repeats itself, and we have a circle of events, spring, summer, autumn, winter. We have a circle of repetitions from year to year. But we believe that life is not stuck in a circle, but while it has a circular movement, it also has a progressive forward movement. And we are invited not to get stuck in the past, but to build. There you go.
I think this event is good. I think it showcases that the community coming together, the elderly along with the youth, especially with the young children putting the roses in. To me, it reflects the circle of life, the journey, how it's beginning with the young and the elders teaching the youth. So I think it represents spring, how we're growing and how we can grow and together and support each other. I believe the Native Americans were here first before the church, so I think it ties in well with us because we all came from the earth. Native Americans believe we came from that, and so I think it's important we take care of Mother Earth. Not only take care of Mother Earth, but also respect our church beliefs as well, and balancing those out. So I think the spiritual side, that's where we're coming from, to balance both of those, our church side as well as the native side.
So it was beautiful to see the teachers, the religious sisters, the principal, the co-principal, to see the gathering of the parents, the grandparents, believe it or not, and all together on a mini pilgrimage, if you wish, joining together, walking together, and praying together, and asking the Lord's blessing so that we may never forget where life comes from.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday morning, it's Morning Edition from 5 a.m. to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now from noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7 p.m. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Casey Counts. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.